In the year 1900, an ancient shipwreck was found off the coast of Antikythera, Greece. Within the ruins of this shipwreck was what we now know of as the oldest computer known to man. It was a bronze gearbox that was used to track the positions of the sun, moon, stars, and other things. Things like when the Olympic Games would be held, and also solar and lunar eclipses. The complexity with which this thing was created and how it works to predict all these different things means to me that there's no way it should have been created when it was. So if this sounds interesting to you, join me right now as we begin the story of the Antikythera Mechanism. So let's start with the story of how this thing was discovered, and let me tell you, it's a coincidence that it was discovered at all. In the year 1900, there was a team of sponge divers that were traveling from the island of Simi to Africa. They were sailing through the Aegean Sea, and they were forced by a massive storm to stop on the island of Antikythera. So since they were there on Antikythera seeking shelter for a few days, they decided that they might as well go dive down and look for sponges there because that's what they were going to North Africa for in the first place. I guess they figured when in Rome, but you know, it was actually Greece. But anyway, what they actually found was not sponges. It was not what they were looking for. They found a massive ancient shipwreck. It contained a lot of artifacts and also a heap of dead people, which turned out to be marble statues. They brought some of the artifacts from the shipwreck to the surface and they took it to the Greek authorities. The Greek authorities were actually good to these people. They signed a contract with these sponge divers to go down there and gather up all that loot and stuff from the shipwreck and, you know, bring it to the authorities. Obviously, they paid them to do that. They also sent a gunboat to, you know, watch out for them. They would basically be on standby for looters and pirates and things of that nature. You got to remember the turn of the 20th century, that was still a rough time in humanity's history. We had bad stuff going on. We still have really bad stuff going on, but they needed actual gunboats to stop literal pirates back then. That's crazy. So the divers, they start bringing the stuff to the surface. They bring the important stuff first. They bring stuff like jewelry, ancient furniture, ceramics, all that kind of stuff. Toward the end, they started bringing up literally everything, and what they brought up next was a corroded piece of old bronze, they thought. Now, it was corroded, but it wasn't just a normal lump of bronze. This lump of bronze was about 13.5 inches wide by 7 inches long and like 3 inches deep, so it literally just looked kind of like a shoebox. Nobody really gave this thing a second look until about 2 years later, whenever there was a Greek politician that went through the museum that this thing was in and being sorted into. This museum was the Athens National Archaeological Museum, obviously in Athens. He looked at this thing and he thought, huh, it looks like there's some gears on it. From that point forward, the museum started actually looking at it and cleaning it up, and they realized there are gears on it. So they start focusing on it a lot. So they tried and tried and tried to understand what this thing was. At first, they thought it was some sort of like navigational instrument or a compass or something like that, but that wasn't it. Nothing really came of this thing for another 50 years until a British scientist started looking at it. This guy was a physicist named Derek de Sola Price, and what he actually did to this thing started the snowball effect of actually discovering what it did. So within those 50 years or so between when the Greeks were studying it and Derek himself studied it, the Greeks basically decided that this thing was not from the actual time of the shipwreck, you know, 100 BC. They thought it was somewhat of an out-of-place artifact, like it was something from modern times, or at least more modern times, that was out there in the same shipwreck as all that other stuff. They were wrong. They decided this because they had found these insanely intricate bronze gears on the Antikythera Mechanism, and they decided that there's just no way the ancient Greeks from that time could have created this thing. Now, as for that guy Price, he studied this thing for years, and he firmly believed that this thing was some sort of calculating machine. He was right. It did calculate things, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it actually calculated here in just a few minutes. So Price tried to recreate the mechanism, but he literally couldn't because of the time that he was trying to do this. He tried doing this stuff during the 1970s, and while they had x-rays and some sort of like gamma ray imaging type stuff, it wasn't as good as it was later on. In the 1990s, more advanced imaging and 3D modeling came along, and that's whenever they actually mapped out all the parts of this thing. There were actually 82 fragments of this thing that Price and the people later on would look at and map out. So despite the fact that there were 82 fragments, that only made up about half of the mechanism, or at least they think. There are most definitely other parts and pieces of this thing that are missing, that are probably on the bottom of the seafloor somewhere, but we don't know where they are. Other divers have gone in there, like Jacques Cousteau himself went down there, looked for pieces and stuff and came up all but empty-handed. They've brought a few more pieces back, but not enough to, assemble the whole thing, not even close. We'll most likely just have to keep guessing at the other parts of the mechanism, and honestly, we have such good and advanced computer systems and 3D modeling, we can do that. I say we, I must speak French or something. There's literally no way I could do anything like that. I'm just a dumb kid from Arkansas. I say kid, I'm not even a kid anymore. I'm 25. I'm having an identity crisis right now, but anyway, let's move on. Oh yeah, speaking of being a dumb kid from Arkansas, if you see all this mess behind me, we're in the process of moving, me and my wife. So this is one of the last videos you'll see in this set, and all this stuff right here is closed. We're packing. I'm sorry, it just is what it is. So as for more realistic models of this thing, in 2011, the Antikythera Mechanism research project started funding very advanced modeling and basically research on this thing. They started implementing advanced x-rays and 3D imaging and basically everything you can think of to map this thing out. They're also able to examine the inside of these parts of the mechanism, including a bunch of inscriptions that are on the thing. And of course, how the gears work together. So that leads us naturally into the question, how did the gears work together? How did this thing function? But just real quick, thank you so much for watching this video. You have no idea how much it means to me that you're sitting here listening to me yap about some ancient mechanism from Greece. It blows my mind that anybody's willing to sit here and listen to that. But anyway, if you're enjoying the video, hit that sub button for me. Helps me out a lot. And now, let's get back into it. So what this thing actually does, back in its day, it was basically a much too advanced for its time gearbox. And it was made of bronze, and that makes a big difference. You turned a knob on the side, and the dials on the front and the back, they all start moving together with a gear system in there that tells you something on the faces of the dials. It wasn't just a useless little gearbox toy like a jack-in-the-box or something like that. It was actually trying to tell you something. It was actually used to track the positions of the sun, moon, and stars, as well as some other stuff. And you could track all these celestial bodies in the past, present, or future, and that is crazy. It was literally a prediction machine and also a log of all the ancient star charts of the time, all in one. That's why scientists call it the world's oldest analog computer, after all. So an analog computer is technically defined as a computation device that uses continuously changing physical phenomena like electrical voltages, fluid pressure, or mechanical motion. This uses mechanical motion to model and solve mathematical problems. So this would absolutely qualify the Antikythera mechanism as an analog computer. It's using mechanical motion to solve a mathematical problem computation thing. It's an astronomical model, which is nothing but math and genius level science. So here's exactly how it works for those interested in the actual mechanics of it. When the hand crank of this thing moved, there was a large planetarium style dial on the front. It all moved and tracked the position of the sun and moon and their relation to the zodiac calendar, basically. This most likely utilized an epicyclic gear train, which basically meant that the sun sort of moved a little bit, but that moved the moon and the stars around it. All these gears are interlocked and they all, the big gear moves and then the small gear move different ways, and that's how it was all put together. It blows my mind, but anyway. So on this front dial, this zodiac calendar where everything's moving, they actually use an Egyptian calendar, and we know this because it's inscribed on there, the Egyptian months. It was most likely some sort of lunar calendar that the Egyptians used, and I'm not even going to pretend to understand all the ins and outs of this stuff. This is way over my head. I just talk about stuff on YouTube. But anyway, if you're really interested in this, go read about it. I'll tell you more about how it works, but if you want the intricacies of the calendars, that's on you. Just know that that front dial shows the sun and the zodiac and their positions with each other, and also the moon moves on a little pin. There's a golden ball that moves and shows you where the moon is. It's absolutely insane to me that they could figure out how to do this in 100 BC, and I can't even visualize this now. I guess I'm not a mechanical engineer, but I'm not stupid. It just still kind of blows my mind. I might be stupid. That's kind of a lie. Anyway, that's not even to mention the back yet. It had 5 dials on the back. So the most upper dial on this back tracks the Metonic cycle. So the Metonic cycle is a 19-year cycle of lunar months after which the sun and moon realign with each other. It's really advanced stuff. Whenever they realign, it all resets and you can keep going further and further into the future to predict stuff. The lower dial on this thing tracks the Saros cycle. The Saros cycle is an 18-year cycle that tracks solar and lunar eclipses, including where they're going to be seen on Earth, when they happen, happen, whether it's a solar or a lunar eclipse, all this stuff. I don't think you or I quite understand how advanced this thing was, and we're still not done yet. We still have 3 more gears on the back. So these 3 dials on the back are considered secondary dials because they move around the big ones. These things tracked the 4-year Olympiad cycle, so basically when the Olympic Games would be held. We are talking about the ancient Greeks after all, and those people literally loved their games more than they loved just about anything. So this mechanism used what we know now as differential gearing. This is a gear train that had 3 different drive shafts that all worked basically in unison or together somewhat to move all these dials in the ways that they need to move. This was the very first known example of differential gearing in literally all of history. And it would stay that way for a very long time. Like, mechanical engineers in the 1600s are the next example of figuring out differential gearing. So like 1700 years before the people in the 1600s, they had this stuff in ancient Greece. That's crazy. And they did this with bronze. Bronze is notoriously softer than something like steel. That means it was much harder to work with and get all the gears to actually work and not chip off and all that other stuff. But they did it. And by they, who exactly do I mean? Well, let's talk about who invented this thing. So we know that the ancient Greeks built this thing, but that's way too vague. There are really 2 main guys that we think could have invented this thing, with Archimedes being the main guy. Archimedes was an absolutely legendary inventor and just basically a genius from the island of Sicily, the town of Syracuse. We know that he invented compound pulleys and war machines and all kinds of different stuff that took super advanced mathematics that he understood, and basically him alone understood, and applied them to things in the physical world. He's also known to have created some sort of planetarium device where you could track the location of the sun and moon, according to the ancient Roman orator Cicero. This would have either been a precursor to the Antikythera mechanism or the mechanism itself. But if it was anyone in the Archimedes line, it would have been his students or intellectual successors, most likely. The timeline for this thing's creation and Archimedes' death don't exactly line up. Like, Archimedes died in around 200 BC, or give or take a few years, either way. So this thing would have been built like 100 years after that, if all of our dating stuff is right. So if it wasn't him, he had tons of students and intellectual successors, like I said, and if he had created a prototype, because we know he created something like this, they could have absolutely taken his idea and ran with it. There's also the fact that the calendar that's used on that Metonic dial that we mentioned, it actually uses the Corinthian calendar. Syracuse was a colony of Corinth at the time, so Archimedes was definitely using this calendar, so makes sense. All that stuff kind of lines up, but you could also say that about our next guy, Posidonius. This guy was from Rhodes, and he was a Stoic philosopher and polymath, inventor, genius like Archimedes himself. A school of his followers was created just like Archimedes had. The thing that points to him creating this just like Archimedes is that Cicero said that he studied under this guy and he had created some sort of mechanical orrery, or a model of planetary motion. So combine this with the fact that in the wreckage of that shipwreck that the Antikythera mechanism was found in, there were a bunch of Rhodian style vases, and you have just as compelling an argument for this guy as you did for Archimedes. The truth of the matter is, we don't know who created it. There are a bunch of inscriptions and stuff on it, but they're just months and about how the thing worked. Wasn't anything about who created it. We will probably never know exactly who created it, but that's okay. We do know how it was made. It was made up of 37 gears of insanely precisely cut bronze. This would have been pretty hard for even the top machinists of today, so how they did it back then, I don't know. The bronze alloy that they chose to make this thing out of was low in lead, so it was actually harder than, you know, your normal average soft bronze, so that makes it easier to work with. But to me, that just means they had an insanely good grasp of metallurgy, how all these alloys and stuff worked. I mean, everything about this just, it's crazy. The level of complexity to this thing with the alloy of bronze they chose, the gears, how they created those, the inscriptions on the thing, even the advanced astronomy that they had to know to create this thing, it all screams that it was almost impossible to make back then. But they did. They made it. And they also made others like it. Cicero in his writings mentions multiple of these things, so it's very likely that they made more of these things and everybody just took it for granted back then, I guess. And the fact that it was so precise and everything about it was so perfect meant that they probably made more than one of these things anyway. Like, it was a repeatable process. Now, we haven't actually found any more of these things, but back then we know that they took basically everything that wasn't being currently used and just melted it back down and made something else out of it. There's literally no telling how many similar devices to this Antikythera mechanism and other things were created in the ancient days and then just either burned or melted down and used for some other purpose, and we will never know. It's a crying shame that we will never know about stuff like this, but this shipwreck at least saved this one for us. I will say there are other outliers out there from ancient history of complex things that honestly shouldn't have been created when they were. For one, there was a guy named Hero of Alexandria in 50 AD that created the world's first functioning steam engine. This thing was basically the first jet engine of all time. It was known as an Ellipoli, and honestly, it was very basic, but it was still functional. There wouldn't be another functional steam engine recorded in history for another 1,500 years. That was when a guy from Spain created one very similar to this one from Hero, and then he took it to the government saying that it could actually propel ships whenever there was no wind, because all they had was sailboats back then. But anyway, the government didn't believe him, and it was kind of buried also. There was also the Baghdad battery, which could very well be a hoax, but it might not have been. It was either a hoax, an ancient battery that actually worked, or it was something that they just threw together and somehow it actually produced electricity. But either way, it's pretty cool. It was a ceramic pot with a copper cylinder through it that was held in place by a asphalt ring around it. I think it was bitumen, and through that copper cylinder there was an iron rod. Within the pot there was an acidic solution in there that whenever it all worked together on the end of that iron rod, it produced electricity. Low voltage, but still electricity. It was said to have been created somewhere between 150 BC and 650 AD in ancient Iraq, which that's a long time period, but either way. Back then, they might have used it for something known as electroplating, which basically meant they could deposit little pieces of metal on other things, so even like thin sheets of metal for armor purposes, stuff like that. But archaeologists say it probably wasn't because they never found literally anything like this in ancient Iraq, so I'll say it probably wasn't also. And the only one that archaeologists ever actually found disappeared in the US's invasion of Iraq in 2003 and hasn't been seen since, so that's over 20 years. It's probably not coming back. I guess we'll never know. Anyway, all that is to say that in ancient times, they had advanced technologies, stuff like the Antikythera mechanism that seemed very out of place, but it wasn't. Not totally, anyway. Advanced areas of study led to crazy advanced achievements and inventions in certain departments. So, ancient Greece, astronomy and math, that was like the two things they valued more than anything. So, crazy advancements creating this Antikythera mechanism, it's not out of the question. They combined both of their loves, math and astronomy, into the first computer of all time, which is awesome. The scariest part of this entire conversation to me is, how much did we lose? We have this one advanced mechanism, the Antikythera mechanism, sure, but all the advanced knowledge that was accumulated and everything like that, we don't know what we lost. Especially in stuff like the fires of the Library of Alexandria. What was there? What was lost there? I don't know. That might be the next video, actually. I will say, if you like questions like that, then you would absolutely love my Ancient Mysteries of the World Iceberg series. I'll link it on screen here. We talk about stuff like the Antikythera mechanism and the question, what was lost in the Library of Alexandria? It's all in those videos. So if you want to watch that, go watch it right now. Hit that sub button if you aren't subbed already. We got more great content coming out soon. Until next time, peace.